So it's a set of goals and objectives that can be useful for you and your child. There's a one-page handout that I just handed out to you. And you can also access it on understood.org, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute. This is the IEP for home. These are the goals. There's objectives that are attached to the goals for the IEP for home. The first one is having fun. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on what does it mean to have fun with your child. I spend a lot of time talking about sleeping and eating behaviors. How do you teach good sleeping habits for your child, and how do you teach good eating habits? I don't usually have a chance to talk about movement. I talk a lot about following routines and rules. And then usually the ones that are down here I don't get a chance to talk to you very much. Okay? We do talk about services at school, all right? So that tells you a little bit about how much time it takes to have these conversations. And I get to see families. The main point of the IEP for home and the toolkit is just for you to set goals for yourself, for you to use it as a conversational tool. Really, my only vision for you is to have a list of questions or a list of goals and objectives that you could bring to a specialist like me and say, this is what I need you to help me with, okay? Because the parents that I work with don't know which questions they're supposed to be asking, and they're waiting to answer the questions that the specialist asks. But I want to make sure that you have a set of questions that you want the specialist to answer. And a lot of the questions that parents are really wanting to ask are the ones that are listed in the IEP for home. You can also, I'm going to give you a couple of pointers about the IEP for home and how it works, because it's going to help you organize your thinking whenever you do talk with a therapist or one of your friends or whatever. Is first of all that the goals are listed in a very specific order, and it's really worth paying attention to the order, because the most important thing that you have to think about is, are you having fun being a parent, or are you having fun being a professional working with this child? And if you're not, backpedal, okay? Figure out some way to enjoy this child's company and make sure that the child knows that they can enjoy you. Because the teaching is hard, and the children are not going to thank you for it, and they're going to give you a lot of pushback, and you need to be excited about what you're doing, and they need to be excited about you, and they need to know that you care for them. And so one way to access that is to start having fun with them, okay? And in this morning session, we spent quite a bit of time talking about what does it mean to have fun with your child, especially, for example, one of the parents was telling me their child is bedridden. That's complicated. Or another family has a child that doesn't speak. And so how do you have fun, or how do you show your child how much you care for them when their communication skills are so limited? But you do have to start with that. Then the next one, good sleeping, good eating habits are my anchors, okay? Everything else depends on having good eating and sleeping habits. They are kind of what I call my physiological routines. And to really nail those down, first of all, isn't easy, but secondly, it really makes everything else easier if you're able to get through these two anchors first, because a lot of the other stuff flows much more easily once you've figured out those anchors. Movement, you could put anywhere on the list, I think. I put it here because I think it's important, but you can do it really anywhere. And then routines and rules, I spent a lot of time on this. Screen time rules, whose favorite topic is that, right? So we spent a lot of time talking about screen time rules. It's really complicated, okay? So focus on the order. Second, focus on the first goal, okay? And this is what I was saying earlier about how do you show your child how much you appreciate them, how much do you show your child that you're lovable and that you care about them, because when you set limits on them, like screen time rules, they're usually not particularly happy about it. Now, another phrase that I often use is, whatever you do in the work that you do with kids, the child has to be able to respond to you and say, I know that I'm loved and cared for, okay? Whatever you do, doesn't matter how mad you made your child, or how mad you made the child that you're working with in a school setting or elsewhere, there has to be a part of you that thinks, this kid knows that I love them, and it knows that I'm doing this because I care about them. And if you've lost that, it's going to be much harder to do the teaching. So again, do some backpedaling and thinking about the relationship before you tackle the whole IEP for home. I want you also to think about this as a process, that just because you attended the seminar is for sure not going to solve all your problems. It's going to orient you and make you think about what problems you might like to solve. But even if you were able to meet with me, let's say 10 times a year, how quickly are those skills going to come into place? And it takes a while. It takes days or weeks or months, depending on which skill you're working on. So have what I call a teaching mindset. Be prepared for slow progress. Celebrate small successes. So let's talk about sleep first. And these are the objectives that I've written down. They're in the toolkit online, okay? And we'll look at them in a minute, but tell me, who wants to talk about their child's sleep habits? Do you want to start? One of you want to start? Or what's the usual fall asleep time?
Around 10 at least.
So this is an important distinction. This is a routine question that I'll ask in the clinic. So the parents will tell me, my child doesn't sleep, and usually that's how it starts. What time does your child get put to bed? Well, he's supposed to go to bed at, right? Okay, great. I'm glad you know when he's supposed to go to bed. What time does your child go to bed? And I usually get a time. So we're saying 10 o'clock is the time that your brother's in bed.
Yeah.
And there's a separate thing called the fall asleep time.
Because they have a, we work with my parents have people that work with him.
Uh-huh.
And they give him a sleep routine. And then he has to go to bed by 10 p.m.
Right.
And sometimes he doesn't go to bed.
Okay, well that's another little wrinkle, okay? So sometimes your brother's in bed at 10, sometimes he's not. The really important piece of information though is what's the time that he falls asleep. So all of you that are worried about your kids sleeping, you've got to know what that fall asleep time is. And you may need to stay up awake later than your bedtime to figure this out, especially if your kid's a teenager, okay? So sometimes parents will give me an estimate, and when I dig into the story a bit more deeply, I realize, oh, the parents have already gone to bed, right? So to do this properly, you have to know what the fall asleep time is. Then you need to know how many hours does he sleep after that. And do you know the answer to that question?
No.
So you think he sleeps until 6, until 8, until 10?
Probably until 12.
Until 12, okay. So one thing is counting up the number of hours of sleep. So I'll spend 2 or 3 minutes talking with the family about how many hours of sleep does your child get. This is actually a more complicated question than you might realize. First of all, because sometimes the parents are sleeping. Secondly, because you don't always know when your child's awake. Usually you do, but not always, okay? When they wake up in the middle of the night and turn the TV on, okay? And the third one is you don't always know if your child is napping during the school bus ride. They fell asleep at 2, you yank them out of bed at 6, they do a little cat napping on the school bus on the way to school. Some kids are napping at school. Some kids are sleeping during the morning hours only and then sort of they perk up. Some of them have a nap when they get home. Sometimes the nap occurs when the parents are at work. So it gets complicated, okay? But the first thing that I want you to know is you've got to know how many hours of sleep are truly happening. Don't worry about the bedtime that you keep failing or that you think it's supposed to be. We don't know what the bedtime's supposed to be yet, but we want to figure out how many hours of sleep does your child actually get. The second thing is how many hours of sleep is your child supposed to get? And do you guys know where to go to figure that out? Because it varies by age. Okay, there's resources online for this, okay? So my go-to figure is for toddlers under the age of 2, probably 14 hours. For ages 2 to 4, 12 hours, maybe by 4 down to 11 hours. School-age kids about 10 hours, and then teenagers maybe about 9 hours. So that's going to give you a rough guide of how many hours of sleep your kid is supposed to have. That's what the textbooks say. I'll tell you what reality says in a minute, okay? So you've figured out how many hours your child is sleeping. You've got to compare that with how many hours your child is supposed to sleep. Most of the time, when I walk the parents through this history, they realize, oh, he does sleep, right? The sleeping part is normal. Now, the timing is usually off. The co-sleeping is a problem that a lot of parents don't want to deal with. You know, maybe there's napping during the day, but there is normal sleep happening, it's just at the wrong times. But here's the dilemma. You don't know what you're supposed to do until you know what the facts of your sleeping behaviors are. See how hard this is? This is hard stuff.
Sometimes 11, sometimes 12,
Right.
1.
Right, okay. So if you were to track it over a couple of weeks, what you'd notice is you get an average of some kind. And that's sometimes where I tell parents to start, because it is so confusing. It does seem so variable. The other piece that you have to really be mindful of is the kids will tell you that they're not sleeping, but sometimes they are. And so you'd almost have to sort of stay up for several hours to monitor this yourself, and hopefully without your kid noticing, because that becomes a reason to stay awake. But really mapping out, when is my child sleeping properly? Because probably there's a stretch of time when the sleep is good. And then we can start to build, when should your child be sleeping? I really don't, one of my pet peeves is how often medications are prescribed before all these questions are answered. Because most commonly, especially if your child is sleeping at school, like so what you're saying is your daughter goes to bed very late and you have to end up driving her to school because she's sleeping in
She
school.
left 1 hour or 2.
Okay, so here's the first decision tree you've got to make. First of all, you've got to decide for yourself, yes or no, my child sleeps a normal number of hours per 24 hours, okay? And they may or may not, but usually they are, in fact. The second thing is, what time would you like them to wake up? Okay, and this is a counterintuitive question, and this is the one time when you're allowed to be selfish. And you really say, for my family, what would work the best would be if my kid woke up at, and then you've got to decide whatever the hour is. It's going to be 5 or 6 or 7 or something along those lines, okay? And you make that the wake-up time, and that in fact is the first objective. I wrote down 5 days a week. When you first do the training, you're going to work on 7 days a week. And the wake-up time has to be very, very consistent, okay? The second thing you've got to verify is that there's no sleeping happening during the day. This is not necessarily easy, okay? You've got to really dig around and find out, any little pockets of sleep can really make up for a lot of the sleep lost at nighttime. You've got to try to eliminate those. Sometimes you won't be able to do it during the school year. You'll have to wait for vacation or something because you as a parent are working or the kids are at school and they're not supervising, you're not sure. But you want to eliminate all of the sleeping that happens during the day, okay? And those are 2 critical steps towards making your child more ready to fall asleep at night, okay? Now the third thing is, you've got to figure out, well, what would be an appropriate bedtime? Because sometimes the kids are being put to bed too early. They're just not ready to sleep yet, all right? And so if you know that the wake-up time has to be 6, you count backwards and say, well, my kid's a teenager, so it should be about 9 hours, or my kid's a 6-year-old, so it should be about 10 hours. If the wake-up time is 6, the bedtime's going to have to be 8 or 9 or something along those lines. And that's where you then start your bedtime routine sometime shortly before that chosen bedtime, the one that's more accurate for your kid, okay? Now there's a little trick here you can use, and I call it sleep deprivation or sleep compression, which means is that you actually keep your kid up late. So let's say you think the bedtime should be 8. You don't let them go to bed until 9, right? And you do that for 2 or 3 nights because you're only giving that 6-year-old, say, 9 hours of sleep when really they need 10. And over the course of a few days, they start to get tired and they actually really want to go to bed before 9. And then you can start to inch the bedtime forward, okay? So that's an example of a successful treatment. You figure out how many hours your kid is getting, you decide what the wake-up time is, you eliminate all the daytime sleep, and for almost all school-age children that should be appropriate. And then you figure out what the bedtime is. Okay? What you're showing me is that I have the right structures to share with you, but the tweaking and the twiddling not only takes a fair bit of back and forth conversation, but it takes time on your part. You're not going to solve this problem in a week or 2. You get
He's 10.
yeah, you get to know your kid over time. You've got 2 young kids that are sleeping from 6:45 p.m. to 5:45 a.m.
Yes.
How many people are completely jealous? Like,
But
wow,
But they would wake up, like, so, but.
Okay, I want to celebrate your success here. You've got great sleepers. Okay, that's a really good thing. Okay, so now you're going to have to make a judicious decision about: are you the one that's being too rigid, and you just need to start your day earlier, or because we're not fixing a sleeping problem for your kids, we're fixing a fixing problem for you now.
Oh,
Okay. Now
I thought it was too little for him to use.
11 hours for a 4-year-old is great sleeping.
Okay.
Great sleeping. Okay, so that's one piece of information that's useful. The other one though is I don't want to dismiss the importance of parents sleeping here. Your sleep is super important. If you're not taking care of your sleep, and if I'm not helping you take care of your sleep, your kids are not going to get good parenting for that first hour, right? So I want you to sleep well. Okay, just really think through when can you do this and when should you do this, and is it going to be easier for the family if you adjust your sleeping schedule, or could you work on the kids? Now, the usual what you just told me, I tried putting my kids to bed later, but it didn't work. It certainly doesn't work the first day or 2. That's for sure. Okay, so you want to get them through several days of that going to bed later. I don't want to sleep later. Okay, because you've kept the bedtime routine rigid. Okay, but it takes probably less than a week. Okay, so but you have to stick through it. And what's hard about this is that you've got grumpy, crying, even tantrumy kids yelling at you saying, I hate you, for the whole day maybe, and you're starting to really question what you're doing, and then you start to backpedal and say that was the wrong decision, okay? Now that's part of the reason why I really want you to make these decisions in conversation with other people, because you could leave here thinking, gee whiz, I can't believe the doctor said those things, right? But what the families that I work with can do is they can call me. They give me feedback a month later when we get together again. They tell me what happened. So I'm able to sort of tweak it and make it work. Okay? So the first thing is you want to have your child eat different food flavors and different food textures. So that's teaching them flexibility and tolerating different flavors and textures and not being picky. You want them on a schedule. And then you want them to eat all the good foods that you wish that they would eat. And sometimes the parents aren't eating these good foods themselves. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then last, who has time and luxury for this? Teaching them good table manners, okay? Maybe you're at that stage, okay?
Yeah, well,
okay.
a long time coming.
Uh-huh, okay.
Time coming.
Okay. So again, those are just some sample objectives. It may take you a while to get there. Okay. So in fact, I hesitated between these two because I don't know which one should be first. It depends on your situation. But we're going to talk about scheduling the eating first because this is really going to help you out. Okay, I love schedules especially for kids. Actually, for me. So you want to have eating behaviors occurring on a schedule. You want to have 3 meals a day, and then you have to decide 1 to 3 snacks per day. The meals have to be at a pre-specified time. Meals last for 20 to 30 minutes, that's it. Okay, you get to eat as much as you want, but meals are limited by time. Snacks are also timed, but they're limited by calories. They're not limited by how long it takes you to eat them. So 3 meals a day, on a schedule, maximum 20 to 30 minutes. Whatever you want to eat, you get to eat during that time, and then the meal is over. Snacks, 1 to 3 per day, depends on how much you think your kid needs to eat. 1 piece of food, so 1 granola bar, 1 slice of apple, 3 carrot sticks. You have to predetermine the calories. Go ahead. So the first strategy is having it on a schedule, okay? Now the second thing you have to know is kids are not going to eat every time you offer them food, okay? But you do need to structure it so that the food's only available when you decide the food's available. Because if you don't do that, they'll decide when they're hungry and they'll eat when they think they're supposed to be eating, okay? And that runs you into trouble, and that's when you get into grazing behaviors, for example, okay? Now, easier said than done, all right? Because you have to somehow keep them away from food when it's not the right time. I don't really want you to put locks in your kitchen cupboards because that seems so restrictive, but somehow you've got to make sure that the message or the behaviors are clear. Eating occurs when we're sitting together. It lasts for 20 or 30 minutes. You get a snack, but you only get a certain amount of food per snack. You do that for a week, and then you start to see how the kids really are changing their behaviors. Again, easier said than done because the grazing behavior, they're going to want to do the grazing. She didn't eat in the morning, you're feeling worried. You're saying, gee whiz, can I really let her go for so long without any food? You sort of give in, okay, well maybe today we won't follow the schedule. You have to really take this on, but you have to take it on believing like you're doing something good and be proud of yourself for doing it, okay? If you're feeling hesitant about it, it's probably not going to work. Okay, same thing with sleeping behaviors. So for sure, do not follow my advice if it doesn't feel right, okay? It's really good advice, but it's got to feel right to you, and you've got to make it work. And the one way to make it work is to feel confident that you're doing the right thing. 2 young children, and you have 3 young children, and you're hesitant to put it you're hesitant to put the food on a schedule because if they don't eat at the right time, they're going to try to eat at the wrong time, and you don't want to have to say no to them. Yeah. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me more about why it's hard for you to say no to them. You don't want them to be hungry, okay? Great. This is super common. This is hard stuff. Now, if you set the schedule up properly and you know that there's going to be food available every couple of hours, maybe you're not going to mind, okay? And it's really just about, I'm going to let you know when you can have the food. Oh, are you hungry? Well, you'll have to wait until the next time. Let's look at the time together. How much more time do you have to wait? So you're sort of helping them understand a schedule. This is actually really, really important setup for schedules and routines, okay? I'm doing this by design. I don't want you to feel guilty for making them feel hungry. In fact, you need to make them feel hungry. And one of the reasons why the schedule is so important is the kids need to get a sense of hunger and know what it's like to feel hungry, and then they have to eat and get a sense of what it feels like to be nourished and not to be hungry anymore. And then they have to get hungry again, and then they have to eat again to not feel hungry, okay? That is how you teach self-regulation skills. That's how you teach self-regulation of your eating behaviors. And you don't want to be the one that decides that for them. You want them to learn it, but it's the schedule that teaches it, okay? 6?
And she's 6.
She's 6. So your daughter is eating 2 meals a day, and what else?
And she eats 2 meals a day, and then in between, both my kids can have fruits and veggies whenever they
got it. Okay, so you've decided to not limit the snacks, but it's limited to the kind of calorie. So she's eating maybe 2 to 4 times a day. Who here would be worried or feel jittery about that schedule?
That's good.
Oh, there's something. Yeah, I'm saying, wow, this is great,
and
right?
breakfast is a big meal for her.
Uh-huh.
That's great.
Okay,
Yeah, she
now
might
here's
eat that.
the secret of the trade. Spoiler alert. What do pediatricians care about?
Growth.
Growth. Growth. Did the pediatrician share the growth curve with you?
She's been growing.
Wonderful.
100%.
Okay, everyone here is jealous of your success. Okay?
But I think that as a parent and as a mom, you're like, my kids need to eat. My kids need to eat. And we feel like we've failed, we make this beautiful
Right.
dinner.
Right.
And my daughter, and of course, as they get older, it's a control thing too. My daughter literally had made something. My husband goes, "Oh, that smells wonderful. What did you make?" And I said, "Oh, chicken chili." And I hear her from 2 rooms away. Smells like I'm not gonna eat it. And so there's my daughter because she's very picky.
She knows how to nail you.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I have to be like, "Okay, honey,
Yeah.
just don't
Okay.
eat that."
Okay. So listen,
So-
when you create a meal for your kid, it's one of the most fundamental ways of sharing to your child, I care about you, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to nourish you. And then when they reject you, it doesn't feel very good.
No,
Okay?
so you have to just
Okay.
move
But
on.
you're not her calorie counter. Okay? She's her own calorie counter, and you have to let her count her own calories. She's not counting them mentally.
she's counting
But her
them.
stomach is telling her when she's hungry, when she's full, and she's growing. Everyone here is jealous of you, and you should be very proud of the feeding schedule that you set up.
And
And you don't worry about the calories, worry about the growth. Okay? Another little secret of the trade. After age 2, kids start to eat a lot less because they're growing more slowly. And it's a time when parents start to worry about how many calories is enough, and you get into this worry cycle about their child's eating behaviors. If your child is eating every day and your child is growing, you're doing something right. Okay? Go ahead. Okay? Now, what about the picky eating behavior? So you could put a kid on a
Yeah.
schedule, but they may or may not accept the food that's on the plate.
Exactly.
Very, very rarely, I've seen this with a couple of kids that I have in my practice with autism, they actually lose weight because you're not putting out the right foods for them. But usually I do not worry about weight loss. Usually I want the kids to get hungry and learn how to expand their food repertoire. Okay? Now it takes a few days. It's like the sleeping problem. If you put the kids on a schedule which they're not familiar with, if you put food in front of them, even kid-friendly food that they've said they don't want to eat, they will starve. Like, I shouldn't say that. They will not eat it, and you're not going to feel very positive about it. But you do need to use hunger as your tool to stimulate their appetite so that they start to experiment with new food flavors and new food textures. So usually what I suggest, you can do this cold turkey. Just make whatever you have to make, whatever is good for the family, that's good for your kid, and they have to figure it out. So that's the cold turkey approach. Another approach is make a bunch of food that everyone's happy eating that would be probably acceptable to your child. So corn is acceptable, a different kind of bread from the usual might be acceptable, a different brand of yogurt, some sort of modification in what the kid's already eating, but making it a little bit different and saying, that's it, that's all I have available for you today, and see if they can start to incorporate new foods. An even slower approach, which I don't favor, but sometimes you need to do this, is you start to get their tongue used to new flavors and textures first. Here, have a new brand of yogurt, have a new kind of bread, have a new kind of cheese. Try it first, and then I'll give you the food that you prefer, okay? So deciding which way you're gonna go, cold turkey versus like cool turkey versus kind of slow, that's a judgment call, and that's something that I have to kind of navigate through with families sometimes, and I don't have a good answer for whatever questions you might have in your head, but those are different options you have available. Again, like I said before, unless you feel good about this, you feel from the heart of your hearts, I love you and I care about you and that's why I'm doing this, and I know that you know that too, you have to really convince yourself that this is the right way to go, because if you don't, the kids pick up on the hesitation. When you're hesitant about the food that you're giving, they get hesitant too. Yeah, routines. And the routine really is a routine. It's super important for young children. It's super important for kids with disabilities, okay? As the kids get older, like middle school, the routines are important then too, but you have less control over them, okay? So when the kids are young, preschoolers need a routine. They need to have a lot of predictability. If you don't give a predictable schedule to a preschooler, they're much more likely to be fussy, to not sleep well, to not eat well, etc. Part of the reason is because they get confused so easily, especially the toddlers, but even the preschoolers. What's going on? Like, all of a sudden you say there's a diaper change, and then all of a sudden you say it's time for a meal, and then all of a sudden we're going to go outside and go grocery shopping. When am I going to know what's going on, what's going to happen to me? And the schedule is so important. We don't do this explicitly enough for most kids, right? But the schedule helps them, it anchors them, it gives them a sense of, I know what's going to happen to me today. And when they know that, they start to learn more from the environment. The environment's much more exciting for them when they have a routine to anchor them, and then all of a sudden something new came up. It gets exciting and interesting as opposed to overwhelming, okay? Some kids, like the anxious kids, need a much more micromanaged schedule, and you need to do a lot more talking about it, a lot more showing. Other kids are more flexible, but the schedule is super important. And you may now realize what I told you about sleeping and eating is so critical, because it really helps to set up the daily routine, the activities of the day, okay? And I had a very interesting experience, and again, it just speaks to how much I forget about how much I've had to learn. I was giving a seminar like the one that I'm doing today, and we were talking about routines for one seminar, and the following month we were going to talk about the next topic. And the parents came back and said to me, it was so incredibly helpful what you said about routines. And I said, well, what was it that was so helpful? Well, you told us that if supper is supposed to be at the same time, it means 6 o'clock, and it has to be 6 o'clock. It can't be 5:45, and it can't be 6:15. And I said, uh-huh. And I was really interested to learn that was what they needed from me the most, was that really the rigidity of the routine was what kind of organized the whole family, including the kids, okay? So when I say routine, it's really routine, and it's boring, okay? It could be boring for parents. Makes your job easier, especially for young kids, and especially for kids with disabilities who have a slow time learning. It's going to make your life easier if you can stick to the routine. So you want to have times for the morning routine, and you've got to decide in advance, what is the morning routine? Are you going to have a bath in the morning or not, for example? You've got to have a specific time. I start with evening routine because it's easier. Okay, you have time to figure it out. Then the morning routine, and then if your kids are at that level of schooling, there you have to have a routine around the backpack, and then a routine around tidying up, okay? So the sleeping schedule and the eating schedule are your framework, and then within that you have routines that are done in a very rote manner, and the more you teach the kids, the more successful they are carrying out their routine. The less surprised they are, the better they carry out their routine. So all of the fussing and the futzing and I don't want to do it goes down when they know these things are pre-scheduled. And then in the next section, when I talk about rules, we talk about screen time gets scheduled, playtime outside gets scheduled, etc. Kids tolerate all sorts of limit setting when they know, yeah, I don't get TV now, but I get it later, right? It's way easier for them. And a lot of the screen time struggles that I'm working on are really about lack of predictability. So the kids are really angry when you turn the screen off because they don't know when it's going to be turned back on again, and they don't tolerate that interruption. Now, screens are actually toxic for some other reasons too, but that's one good example, okay? So the two-home situation is less of a problem than you might think. What the kid needs to know is, when are things going to happen when I'm at mom's house, and when are things going to happen when I'm at dad's house. The routines can be different. By the way, dad's going to have a much easier time if he has a routine that he communicates to the child. So one pointer is, make sure your kid knows what the routine is. Now, a lot of parents will say to me, when I say this to them, make sure your child knows what the routine is, the parents will respond, oh, there's a routine. I said, I absolutely believe you that you know what the routine is, okay? But does your child really know what the routine is? And there's a difference. And a really good way to communicate that is through a picture schedule, okay? Now, the picture schedules are not just this nicey intervention. They're actually a pretty significant thing to do for kids, because you can create it together. Okay, let's create our schedule together. Which picture do you want to use for the bedroom cleaning? Which picture do you want to use for the backpack routine, okay? You can use photos of your child, you can make photos of your child's belongings, you can make it like a little arts and crafts project, getting back to cooking together, and now you're creating a schedule together. So one great generic strategy is create the schedule with your child so that you know that your child knows what the schedule is, and there's no surprises around it, okay? Then you post it, okay? Now here's where the rubber hits the road. when I do this with families, about 10% of the time, the kids love it. Complete turnaround, okay? Those kids usually have planning problems, and they're really eager to figure out how the day works, and the schedule is wonderful for them, and they think I'm a miracle worker, okay? 10% of the time, okay? Then you get another 40% of the time it does get better, and then after